Welcome back to FPL Therapy, the weekly FPL podcast hosted by me, FPL Raptor, where each week we are usually joined by a different guest. But for the second week in a row, it is just me. And I promise I do have friends. Basically, this was always planned to be a solo pod because we have a Tuesday deadline. I thought it'd be much easier to get here early in the morning and turn around the podcast in time for you to watch and listen before the deadline. But obviously last week we had a cancellation due to travel. Basically, I'm just trying to justify that. I do have friends and there will be guests back from next week. But for now, you've got another solo podcast, but there is plenty to talk about from the weekend, some very eventful games. And because the deadline is so soon, again, Tuesday evening, we need to make our decisions very, very quickly. So just a reminder, Game Week 14 Tuesday deadline, and then Game Week 15 Saturday deadline. Then we have a few more weeks without the midweeks, and then obviously around Christmas time we have another midweek deadline. So please do not miss the midweek deadline. Every season there are lots that do, and that's obviously not what we need right now. This podcast is sponsored by the wonderful people over at Club. Club is a free-to-play fantasy football mobile game. I highly recommend you check it out. It is already live in a couple of countries. There is a link down below. If it's not live in your country right now, all you have to do is type in your email and join the wait list, and I definitely recommend it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later today. Also, and I always forget to say this, please do remember to subscribe if you enjoy these episodes, and if you are new to this and you enjoy today, please also consider subscribing and make sure to rate 5-star as well if you're listening on audio. So, very briefly, let's review Game Week 13 in terms of my team. And once again, it was another very good week. And I know the whole point of FPL Therapy is usually you enjoy me sitting here and crying about how bad my season's going, but it's been a few good game weeks in a row now. So I'm now up to 560k, which still isn't exactly where I want to be. But considering in Game Week 8, I was 2.9 million, it does go to show how quickly you can rise up the ranks. And honestly, I've not had any outstanding game weeks since Game Week 8. It's just been lots of good consecutive weeks. So it was 83 points in Game Week 13. If you'd have told me I'd have 83 points, I would have never believed you. Because for my first 6 players, I had 9 points. 9 points from 6, averaging 1.5 points per player. And then after that, double Arsenal, double Chelsea, and Salah captain just absolutely delivered. So it was literally like 2 completely different halves of the game week. So yeah, that was pretty much it. It was literally just Arsenal, Chelsea, and Salah. So Sanchez coming in with the clean sheet. We're going to discuss Chelsea defence because actually they've been low-key very, very good this season and going under the radar slightly, although injuries might potentially change that. Palmer obviously delivered. I thought we had quite a really quiet game in all honesty, but a couple of moments of magic, and that's what you get from Cole Palmer. Arsenal were stunning, brilliant in that game. And I know West Ham obviously had a couple of chances, but largely that was a really dominant performance. And Bukayo Saka was unbelievable with his 3 assists and a goal. And to be honest, his first choice penalty taker, there is a world in which he actually takes that first penalty and comes away with 2 goals. And obviously he would have lost the assist, but 2 goals and 2 assists would have been an even bigger score. Gabriel, obviously with the goal and the assist in the first half, was wonderful too. And then Salah, I thought, was remarkably good against Man City. And again, we'll discuss that a little bit later, but that was an incredibly strong performance from him. Outside of that, it was a disaster. We had the likes of Aitnery getting a 0-pointer, Cunha, João Pedro, and Isak getting 5 points between them. I didn't see that coming. Obviously, I have the injury to Isak now, which is something that I'm going to have to deal with moving forward, and I have to make a decision there. But yeah, just a really solid game week. So 83 points. If you are watching this on YouTube, let me know in the comments how many points you got for Game Week 13. The good thing is, if you had a bad week, the next deadline's right around the corner, right? Less than 48 hours. I mean, at the time of you watching this, it'll be probably about 24 hours until the next deadline. And that is the good thing about if you do get a red arrow over this busy period. So yeah, let me know how many points you're on. That puts me now 4 points outside the top 500k. And I am still aiming for about top 200k-ish when we're going into 2025. And I think that'll put me in a really good position for where I'd like to be going into the second half of the season. So, as always, if you are new to FPL Therapy, I'm just basically going to go through the games from Game Week 13, but with an eye sort of looking forward. So talk about who's been performing well, some of the underlying data. I make sure that I watch as many games as possible, and at the very least, all of the extended highlights for the games. So I'll talk a little bit about my eye test and what I've picked up there as well, and which players you should be looking to buy and sell in your FPL teams. And of course, the first game of the game week was Brighton 1, Southampton 1. This was a very frustrating one because obviously you bring in players for a game against Southampton at home. You expect it to go well. And I would just say there have been some disappointing performances against Southampton at home this season. Notably, I triple captained Erling Haaland against Southampton at home for a 6-pointer. I know Strand Larsen blanked a couple of weeks ago against Southampton at home too. We had really high hopes for Aitnery. He only picked up a 6-pointer. And if you brought in João Pedro, Welbeck, or Brighton defence, they didn't really perform in this game. It was only actually Matoma that came away with the points in terms of those FPL assets. And on João Pedro, I thought he was excellent in this game from a footballing perspective. If you watched that and you weren't playing FPL, you'd say João Pedro had an excellent game. He progressed the ball well. He showed a lot for the ball. He wanted to be on it. He got the team ticking. But from an FPL perspective, and that's what we really care about, it was super disappointing. I watched that and I just thought, you're not getting into the positions I want you to be. We'll talk about maybe Jackson a little bit later, or even to some extent Strand Larson. They're number 9s. And I know, by the way, João Pedro isn't an out-and-out 9, but they sort of stay in their position. Right. And that's sort of what I want from João Pedro. I don't want him to be playing fantastic football in his own half. And if you've ever watched João Pedro, he loves to drift into left channels. And this is more of an eye test thing, but he likes to drift out to the left because he loves it when he cuts in on that right, goes on a little dribble, plays a 1-2. A lot of his good work is out from the left. So I have no issue when he drifts out there and he links up with Matoma. But in this game, he was almost dropping into left back. And I said this as a joke. I tweeted out at halftime, wonderful performance from João Pedro at left back tonight. And it was a joke. But the more I watched of the game, he genuinely was playing deeper than like Estepinian at points. And by the way, Estepinian isn't particularly attacking in this Hertzler system. So this is a worry for me, a little bit. But the previous 2 games, I didn't see as much of that. So was it a specific tactical thing where he was like, do you know what? In a game like this, João Pedro might be able to get on the ball a little bit more and cause damage from deep and get the team ticking. Was it something that João Pedro just decided to do himself? I don't know. What I will say, everything still stands for João Pedro, playing in a very attacking team, still on penalties, we believe. The minutes will still continue to be good. And by the way, he got 72 minutes, which was more than the previous 2 games. He's building up his fitness. He's still very cheap, and the fixtures are still so good. If you sort the fixtures by difficulty from 14 to 18, according to Fantasy Football Hub, Brighton are 5th. I would arguably even have them higher. They've got Fulham, Leicester, Crystal Palace, West Ham, Brentford. Okay, 3 of them being away isn't ideal, but there's still not a bad set of fixtures there. So I have no issue with João Pedro. I still think he's a great buy. But if we start to see this more and more, where yes, he's playing in the 10, so he might drop a little bit deeper, but if he's not getting into the box enough and getting involved in those final actions, then we might have an issue on our hands. But I think that is very knee-jerky. Only a few days ago, I was like, João Pedro is probably the best value asset in the game, and a lot of that still does stand. There are some concerns around, is he going to be rested midweek? I would say probably not, because he's playing against Fulham on Thursday. So he's actually got a 5 or 6 day, 5-day turnaround there between game week 13 and 14. However, because he plays Fulham on the Thursday, that means that Leicester is on the Sunday, and therefore he's only really got sort of 2 rest days there. So my greater concern with João Pedro wouldn't be whether he starts Fulham midweek. It would be how many minutes he gets against Leicester on Sunday. So let's assess. Basically, I still think João Pedro is great, but maybe not as perfect as we thought only a few days ago. Like I said, Matoma was the one that grabbed the goal. And most importantly, Matoma got another 90 minutes. And this is why he's such a valuable asset. He's had 90 minutes on pretty much every occasion this season. Only 1 game he didn't start, which was post-international break when he'd done a lot of traveling with Japan. And I think he's still got like 45 minutes in that game. So Matoma is, by far and away, so far this season, the most nailed Brighton attacker. His data's also not too bad either. He's got 0.46 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. He's averaging 1.72 shots in the box per 90 as well. So I actually think Matoma is probably top 3 midfielders to bring in this week, outside of obviously like Saka, Salah, Palmer. I really like him. We'll talk about Mbeumo in a second, but I feel like Matoma is probably one of my top assets that I'd be looking to bring in if I were to replace Mbeumo this week. So yeah, really promising. I don't think you're going to get a ridiculous number of returns from him every week, and Fulham isn't the best entry point, but at his price, I feel like you'd struggle to do it much better than Matoma. The other player that's actually really interesting to me is actually Jorginho Ruta. He's only 5.6 million, and I didn't realize he's actually started every game since game week 4. However, he's not got 90 minutes on more than, he's only 1 occasion he's got 90 minutes, and he's actually only got over 80 minutes on 2 occasions. So he starts every game, or he has been starting every game, but he's not getting consistently good minutes like Matoma in terms of staying on until the very end, which does limit his potential in terms of returns and bonus points too. He's currently playing on the right wing, which is, of course, where Yankuba Minte plays. It's where Solly March plays when he comes back. And Ciso can play out there. Dingra. I mean, they've got lots of options in terms of who can play out on the right. But he has been very good. I mean, cutting on his left foot, he almost scored a goal in game week 12, game week 13. Keep forgetting what game week we're in. And so I think he's honestly a really decent shout if you're struggling for budget. I still think I'd marginally prefer Rodgers and Semenyo, though, because I feel like their minutes are probably slightly safer. But Ruter's not a bad shout at all. So I thought I would just mention him. If he can continue what we've seen so far, very similar data to Matoma per 90, and his minutes stay good, he could offer some decent value. And the only other thing to mention, I still think that Brighton's defence is worth investing in. They're still top half of the table for expected goals conceded. They only, and it's not great, but they only conceded 1.03 XGC against Southampton, which isn't terrible. I still feel like when you look at the cheap defenders that we have on offer, not many of them are keeping that many clean sheets. Not many of them play for fantastic defences. I mean, if I look at my own defence at the moment, I've got Rico Lewis, City look terrible. I've got Ait Nouri, Wolves concede goals for fun. I've got Leif Davis, Ipswich are terrible. I've got Vandenberg. Like, I know there are better ones. You could go for a Chelsea defender, as we'll discuss, but there aren't many better cheap defenders, I would say, than someone like a Van Hecke. And if I am still choosing a Brighton defender, it is still Van Hecke at the moment. Dunk still hasn't started. We still don't know if he will start ahead of Igor, because Igor's been very good. Estepinian doesn't offer the additional attacking threat that we've seen in the past that makes him worth it. Veltman wasn't in the squad. I just don't see who else you go for in that Brighton defence outside of Van Hecke. So yeah, I still think Brighton are definitely a team worth investing in. The fixtures are still there. Yes, it was a disappointing performance against Southampton, but these things happen. Teams don't perform perfectly every single week. And a Friday night game is very unique as well. Like, under the headlights, under the spotlights, I should say. First game of the game week, obviously a little bit sooner than they used to. You're building a narrative here, but I just think one game isn't enough to put me off the Brighton asset. So yeah, I'd still be looking to bring some of them in. Then we move on to obviously the 3 p.m. kickoffs on Saturday. The first being Brentford 4, Leicester 1. Brentford are just absolute goal machines at home. Every single home game, especially against weaker oppositions, they score lots of goals. And it's not even just the goals. They accumulate a silly number of chances. So in this game, they accumulated 2.34 XG. And in fact, Brighton actually have the highest XG per 90 of any team in the league this season at home with 2.38. So they are, by all accounts, and they've had, by the way, some very favourable home fixtures against Southampton, Ipswich, and Leicester and Wolves. So there is some context to be applied here, but they are definitely one of the better teams in the league when they're playing at home. That does mean, though, you don't mind benching their assets as much away because they are definitely stronger at home. So when it comes to someone like a Brian Mbeumo playing against Aston Villa away this week, it makes it feel a little bit easier to potentially bench him because he does tend to perform better at home. However, this was not a good performance for Brian Mbeumo from an FPL perspective. So I've got some data for you, as always. In the last 4 games, Brian Mbeumo has only had 1 shot. 1 shot in 4 games. Bear in mind, he plays 90 minutes in basically every game. And that shot was only 0.09 XG. So that means 0 big chances in 4 games, only the 1 shot. Across the season, Brian Mbeumo is now averaging 0.17 non-penalty expected goals per 90. That's really not very good. We're looking at an expected goal non-penalty every 7 games or so, maybe every 6 games with some favourable fixtures for Mbeumo. For comparison, Wissa is on 0.74 non-penalty expected goals per 90, which is over 4 times better than Mbeumo. So Mbeumo, to put that into sort of plain terms, is just not getting goal-scoring opportunities. You can ignore XG all you want. Watch the games. Brian Mbeumo is just playing very, very wide. He's not taking shots in the box. He's not taking shots in general. And he's playing very well for Brentford. And the system is working. So it worries me. Why would they change it? Yeah, they probably want Mbeumo scoring goals, but Wissa is doing that for them. Kevin Schade looked unbelievable, by the way, in Game Week 13. So I am a little bit worried. That being said, in trickier games in the past, Brentford have often switched to a 3-5-2 or a 5-3-2. It's sort of interchangeable where they play with wing-backs rather than wingers and they play with 2 up front. In the past, when that's happened, Brian Mbeumo has played as a second forward alongside whether that be Tony or Wissa. When he plays as a striker in that 3-5-2, he is very, very, very good. And he often has higher XG because he's getting closer to goal. If that happens, the slightly trickier fixtures coming up for Brentford are actually a good thing because Brian Mbeumo would be in a better position. There are a couple of issues with this, though. I've spoken to some Brentford fans. They aren't fully convinced that for some of these games coming up, especially given that they're not outright horrible games. So for Brentford, they've got, where are their fixtures? Aston Villa, Newcastle, Chelsea, Forest, Brighton. Yeah, they're trickier fixtures, but they're not playing against a City or Arsenal there. So a couple of Brentford fans have suggested, I'm not even that sure that we necessarily do play a 3-5-2 with 2 forwards up top. And the other thing to note is if they do, who's to say that Brian Mbeumo will be one of the two forwards? Because Worcester is definitely going to be. They've got their summer signing who cost a lot of money in Thiago. They've got Kevin Schade, who's off the back of a hat-trick. They have options in terms of who they can play up there with Worcester. Now, I'm not saying, as some people are suggesting, that Mbeumo might play like wing-back in this system. I'm just not convinced by Brian Mbeumo at the moment. So they're all of the reasons that I would be worried. If I am now to go on the other side and play devil's advocate here, I do think that there are lots of advantages to Brian Mbeumo. His creativity has still been very good, playing on the right wing, out wide. He is still carrying a marginal amount of goal threat across the season. Like I said, it's not very good, and it's not. But it's not like it's non-existent goal threat across the season. We've got quite a bit of historical data for Mbeumo at Brentford, playing on the right wing, that he does tend to get goal-scoring opportunities. He is a 90-minute man for the most part, going into a busy period now with midweek deadlines, where you just know that Brian Mbeumo's, I think anyway, going to be in the starting 11 and playing very, very good minutes. And the final thing, he's on penalties. And we have seen, we're going to discuss Chris Wood a little bit later. Chris Wood didn't have a single shot from open play, and he got a 9-pointer, right? Saka, Erdegaard, both scoring penalties. Kluivert got a hat-trick of penalties, as we'll discuss. And I'm not saying that Mbeumo is going to get 3 penalties in a game, but having a penalty taker, it never feels like they have to be rushed out of your team, because they don't have to play well. They don't have to take shots from open play. If they're on penalties and their team wins one, then they're in a really good position. So I think that's all I need to say on Brian Mbeumo. I basically think he is absolutely a justifiable sell, and that isn't a knee-jerk. You look at the fixtures, you look at the lack of shots, he is. But do you remember, and it was actually going into Aston Villa, do you remember when we said Solanke's only taken 2 shots in 3 weeks, and it was 3 shots in 4 weeks? Therefore, I'd sell Solanke, and Solanke goes and delivers a 16-pointer against Aston Villa. This is what good players can do. So I think he is a justifiable sell. I am considering it this week, but I also think he is absolutely fine to hold for a few more weeks whilst we assess what's going on with Brentford. Where's he going to play? Is he going to continue getting a lack of chances? And then you can look to move him on if you want to. Wissa continues to dominate the big chances and honestly continues to look like the one to have from Brentford. If I had Wissa, I would also be very, very tempted to keep him. He had another 0.78 XG accumulated. He had another big chance and, of course, another goal too. He's just performing incredibly well. Now, I do think his minutes will be limited in terms of he'll start pretty much every game, if not every game, but he will get early subs because Thiago's there. And if Schada's not starting, he's in a nice run of form off the back of a hat-trick and he played very well. I don't think Wissa's getting 90 minutes, especially when there are midweek games, but I still think he's a fine hold. The issue is you've got lots of other good forwards with better fixtures coming up like Jackson, Cunha, João Pedro, that there is also justification to sell them. So I almost feel like with Wissa and Mbeumo, they're fine holds and fine sells. It depends what your own setup is like and how well you think Brentford can do with the trickier fixtures. Like I said, Schade was the man of the match, by the way. 3 goals and 1 assist. I do just worry about his minutes, given, like I said, that there are so many options. Even at 5.1 million with the fixtures, I probably wouldn't move for him right now. We'll discuss Ahmad a bit later, but probably at that cheaper price, I'd rather go for someone like an Ahmad if I had to. But honestly, in an ideal world, you're having 5 more expensive midfielders than a 5.1 million. So yeah, really interesting game. Brentford continue to absolutely dominate teams when they're playing at the G-Tech. The next game was Palace 1, Newcastle 1. Maybe not as much to say in this game, but I do obviously need to touch on Alexander Isak. So he came off in the 22nd minute due to injury. According to Howe, it was a contact injury. If you watched it, it did look like a contact injury, right? So Alexander Isak went down. The physio was touching around sort of the hip and the top of the leg. So I reckon it could have been like a bashed hip or something like that. And honestly, that can be painful enough for you to have to go off. And it makes it very difficult to run. But as long as there isn't an issue like a fracture or some sort of issue to the muscle, then honestly, I do think there is a chance that he's available for Liverpool. We're probably not going to get anything because Eddie Howe, first, he lies in press conferences, but even when he doesn't lie, he conceals information. And even if you disagree with that, because Newcastle fans get very angry when I say that, he will say things which makes it sound very likely to be the opposite of what happens. I remember last season, he said Anthony Gordon hasn't trained at any point through this week on a Friday afternoon, and they were playing Saturday at 3 p.m. He's like, Gordon hasn't trained at any point this week, so it looks like a doubt. And then he played, and everyone was like, yeah, well, he wasn't lying. Maybe he didn't train. And you're like, yeah, but the way that he's framed that makes it sound very unlikely that Gordon was going to play. I guess what I'm saying is Eddie Howe's going to give us very little. I will just comment on a few things in favour of Isak. Firstly, he did have a goal ruled out due to marginal offside against West Ham, and he accumulated 0.7 XG. So the performance against West Ham I actually thought was very good from an FPL perspective. And against Palace, yes, I think he only touched it like 7 or 8 times before he went off. But he was only 22 minutes into the game. We've seen this loads with players where they don't do much for the first 20 minutes and then they do a lot a little bit later on. So whilst Newcastle in this game were really, really poor, they actually accumulated 0.02 XG and only had 1 shot. Who knows if Isak was on the pitch, whether that would have been the case. So I don't think you can glean too much from his 2 previous performances. Also, after the Liverpool game, Newcastle play Brentford, Ipswich, Leicester. They are arguably 3 of the best fixtures you can possibly get in terms of weak defences. So there are lots and lots of reasons to hold on to Isak. He's still on penalties. If he's fit and available, I think he is an absolutely fine hold. And I am probably leaning towards holding him myself because I own him at the moment and just benching him against Liverpool because you probably weren't expecting much against Liverpool anyway. However, if he is injured long-term, which might come out before you watch this, or if you just want to make the move anyway, there is justification to sell him. And I think the major justification is 2 things. Firstly, Nicholas Jackson looks unbelievable, who we'll discuss a bit later, and he plays Southampton this week. So that switch from Isak to Jackson looks very good. And then the other reason is if you don't have someone like Bukayo Saka or Cole Palmer, and you want to bring them in, and doing something like Isak to João Pedro allows you to do Mbeumo to Saka, and some people have asked me that, I think that is a justifiable set of moves, especially if it's for free. If it's for a hit, I still would be tempted to do it because I think getting the likes of Saka and Palmer in makes a lot of sense. And that would be one of 2 only reasons that I would be looking to sell Isak. If you desperately want Jackson, or if you want to downgrade Isak to bring in someone like Bukayo Saka or Cole Palmer. But I'm probably leaning towards holding at the moment. But Jackson is very tempting. I really want Anthony Gordon to become an option soon, but we're just not really seeing much from him. Only 2 shots on target in the past 3 game weeks. He's not really massively passing the eye test. And that is also because Newcastle have looked pretty poor in the last few weeks as well. I'm hoping that Newcastle have a really strong performance against Liverpool. They look really good. And maybe Anthony Gordon comes back onto the menu soon because I am looking at something like maybe Mbeumo to Gordon in game week 15 or 16 because you've got that Brentford, Ipswich, Leicester set of games. That could be a really nice point to potentially jump on Anthony Gordon and move away from Brian Mbeumo. But right now, I'm probably not seeing enough from him. And obviously this week against Liverpool at home really isn't a very good entry point. Lewis Hall, I know a lot of people are worried about. Listen, Newcastle are never going to keep clean sheets every week anyway. And he's still got the creativity. He's still good for baseline bonus. He's still taking a lot of set pieces, by the way, especially corners for Newcastle. I still think Lewis Hall is an absolutely fine, cheap defender to own and to buy. Obviously, you're probably not looking to buy him this week because it's Liverpool at home. But if I owned Lewis Hall, unless your team is perfection outside of that, he would not be a priority issue for me at the moment. The defender that really stood out in this game was Munoz. Munoz had 3 big chances in this game and arguably created a big chance, but it was ruled out as offside. So he technically didn't have a big chance created, but that would have been 4 big chance involvements. 3 big chances in a single game is actually the most of any defender in a game week this season, which is remarkable. 0.85 non-penalty expected goals. He really should have had at least 2 goals. The first chance that he missed was awful. The second one was blocked on the line by Dan Burn, and then he eventually scored a header. It was just a really good performance from Munoz. He was basically playing as a right winger, even more attacking than normal. Crystal Palace obviously don't have a good fixture this week, but moving forward, they do have a good fixture this week, but then moving forward, the fixtures aren't ideal. So let's actually get to their fixtures and read them out. So it's Ipswich this week, which is wonderful. And you might think, oh, Munoz stands out. But then after that, it's Man City, Brighton, Arsenal, Bournemouth. So sadly, Eze back in the 11 as well. Munoz looking good. Crystal Palace starting to improve. There could be some temptation, and the fixture is there this week. But beyond that, the fixtures just aren't perfect there for Palace. So yeah, I probably wouldn't be looking at them. But just keep your eye on Munoz because if he maintains that even more advanced position, I like what I saw there. The next game was Forest 1, Ipswich 0. This was a frustrating one for me because I don't own Chris Wood and I do own Leif Davis. Now, I wasn't expecting a clean sheet, but obviously Forest's only goal was a penalty. And Chris Wood had 0 shots from open play. He really wasn't in the game at any point. It was largely a pretty blunt attacking performance from Forest, considering they're playing against supposedly one of the worst defences in the league. They only accumulated 0.82 non-penalty expected goals, which is in line, honestly, with many of their performances this season. Forest are around mid-table in terms of attacking data. So when you've got defenders playing against Forest, like Rico Lewis Gvardiol this week, if they start, of course, Forest aren't the best attack. Now, defensively, it's a different story. Another clean sheet, and they continue to defend very, very well. But yeah, going forward, they are quite blunt. And if I had Chris Wood, now everyone knows I'm a bit of a Chris Wood hater, but I really wouldn't mind selling him because the fixtures coming up, City this week, by the way, if they continue defending the way they have been, it's not awful. United, Villa, Brentford, Spurs. Are they a horrible set of fixtures? Not by any means. Like I said, City are 16th or 17th for non-penalty expected goals over the last 6. So they're bottom 5 defences in the league. United are still conceding chances. Villa have not been great defensively over the last few. Brentford aren't the best defence, especially when they're playing at the G-Tech. They go sort of all out. And Spurs concede chances. So the next 5 aren't bad for Chris Wood. But when I compare him to like a Cunha, well, I'd definitely rather have Cunha. I'd rather have João Pedro and the money saved. So it doesn't feel like a horrible exit point from Chris Wood. But once again, if you have other issues in your team to deal with, I also wouldn't mind hanging on to him. But yeah, it wasn't the best performance, I would say, from an attacking perspective for Nottingham Forest. I will once again talk about Leif Davis because it was an exceptional performance. 0.33 expected assist. He had 3 key passes. If you watch the game, there was a header from O'Shea, and he really, really should have scored it. I mean, there was a clearance on the line from Ola Aina, who, by the way, had another good performance. And I think that was every week there's a chance that Leif Davis could have potentially had an assist for. But I like owning him, right? He's just such an attacking defender. I've actually pulled up some stats rather than me just sitting here and saying, I love Leif Davis. He has created the most big chances in the league this season with 9, and the next best is 8. He also has the most key passes of any defender in the league this season with 31. The next best is 21. So out of defenders this season, he is comfortably the most attacking, like by some distance. He's also created the most chances as well, not just big chances. So all 3 of the best numbers that you have to determine if a defender is creative, Leif Davis is top for defenders this season. So yeah, Leif Davis continues to look exceptionally good. On Nottingham Forest defence, I've missed out this season, right? I actually spoke about all season how good Forest were. They were 4th last season for non-penalty expected goals conceded. This season, they are 2nd. So 4th last season in terms of defensive data, 2nd this season, and the clean sheets are there as well. Someone like Ola Aina has been so good. 8 points again this week. He's now 3rd top scoring defender this season. I've massively missed out there. And if I had Nottingham Forest defenders, I'm not necessarily sure I would rush to sell them as long as I could rotate them out. But when I go back to those fixtures, I said they're actually not bad for Chris Wood. I do think they are bad for Nottingham Forest defenders because City, for all that they are, they still create chances. I know they've not scored many goals recently, but you would expect them to score at home against Forest. United look a lot better going forward under Amorim. Villa, hit and miss there, but I wouldn't expect a clean sheet there for Forest. Brentford at the G-Tech will score goals, and then it's Spurs after that. I don't see more than 1 clean sheet in the next 5. And if you were to ask me to predict, and this isn't disrespecting Nottingham Forest, they've been really good, I would say 0 clean sheets across the next 5. So yeah, I almost feel like, again, and I don't want to sit on the fence for everything here, you could sell or you could keep your Forest assets. I'd feel better keeping and starting Chris Wood than I would a defender, just simply because I just don't like those fixtures from a defensive perspective. But I think that's pretty much it for Forest Ipswich. If you've got a Delap, by the way, you could still hold on to him, but there are a lot of other cheap forwards that I like, probably slightly more. So again, it's if you're in that luxury position to be able to sell him. The next game was Wolves 2, Bournemouth 4. This was an absolute chaos of a game. Wolves are just a mess defensively, and we've now seen it against weaker opposition. I just don't think they're a very good defense. So we did say that because of how difficult their games were at the start of the season, maybe their defense isn't as bad as we first thought. I think it is as bad as we first thought, and Ait-Nouri just isn't going to be getting you any clean sheets. They actually conceded 3 penalties in this game, if you didn't watch. And honestly, all 3 of them were really poorly conceded. 2 of them were given away by Jose Sarr. I will just say one of them was a really bad back pass by Dawson, so it probably wasn't Jose Sarr's fault massively, but it's just clumsy. They look just at 6s and 7s. They look like they don't really understand their defensive structure. And they are at the moment playing this back 4 system. I do wonder whether, given how bad they've been defensively and how much they look like they are struggling from a structural perspective, I do wonder whether they might switch back to a 3 at the back or a 5 at the back. The issue is they don't have a massive amount of depth and options in the defense, but I just feel like they generally look a little bit better in a 3 at the back system. And if that does happen, it makes Ait-Nouri such a good option because in this back 4, he's playing as a left back, or you could even say a left wing back. But in a 5 at the back, he's playing as a left winger. So he is still getting chances going forward. He had a couple of very, very small chances. I think he had 2 shots. He created a couple of small chances, but he's definitely not the asset that he was in terms of when he was playing in that 5 at the back. I really don't think Ait-Nouri is a bad hold for the next 4. He's got Everton, West Ham, and I think it's Ipswich and Leicester. So the next 4 games are fine. Do remember that he is on 4 yellow cards, though. So there is a chance that he does miss a game in the upcoming period due to suspension. I feel like he's almost don't buy, don't sell, don't bench over the next spot. I would just hold and start Ait-Nouri. If I was on a wild card this week, probably wouldn't have Ait-Nouri just because of how bad Wolves have been. And if they do continue with the back 4, he's just not the same option. So yeah, I'd probably just, whatever you've got in your situation with Ait-Nouri right now, I would just keep it as it is. Strand Larsen finally delivers. And I honestly was advising people, if you've got the luxury transfer, I'd probably sell Strand Larsen. And this is what happens in FPL. It's very difficult to predict. I will firstly say, because I've always not been that keen on Strand Larsen, he took both of his goals extremely well. There was one header, one obviously shot too. Just really, really well taken. Looked very, very clinical. They were only together 0.25 XG. I think that feels a little bit low. When I watched them, I was like, yeah, they're both very, very good chances for him. However, Wolves and Strand Larsen aren't accumulating very high XG chances. And that was honestly the reasoning that I gave for not captaining Cunha at all at any point. And especially last week against Bournemouth, I was like, I don't really want to captain Cunha when Wolves aren't creating enough high quality chances. And honestly, it was the same once again. Strand Larsen, 0.25 XG. Cunha, he had 0 big chances and 1 very small chance. They're just not creating enough at the moment for me to justify captaining them. Now, does that mean that Strand Larsen and Cunha are bad? No. Again, Everton, West Ham, Ipswich, Leicester in the next 4. They're exceptionally good fixtures. If I had Strand Larsen now off the back of a brace, yeah, I probably would keep him because you could hope that his confidence will be very high now and the goals will start to flow in. He's actually not far off the same returns as Cunha for this season. If you are worried about Cunha, if you watched the game, really was a pretty quiet game for him. He didn't manage to get on the ball as much as usual, and he had 0 big chances and created 0 big chances. And that's the first time now, I think, since game week 6. Actually, maybe in the Man City game. No, he created a big chance in the City game. I think that's the first time since game week 6 that he's not been involved in a big chance. So yeah, just generally a very quiet game. These things happen in FPL. You can't expect a player to return every week. Even at the price of Haaland and Salah, you're not expecting returns every week. So especially for someone at around 7 million, he's going to have games where he blanks. But he's been so good recently. All of the things that we said are still true. Taking set pieces, on penalties, good underlying data, so talismanic, 90-minute man. The fixtures are there. Cunha is still a wonderful player to have. I honestly still think he's a great transfer in for this week too. I expect that Wolves could grab a couple of goals against Everton, but this is why for the rest of the season, I won't consider, usually unless there's a double game week, captaining players from lower teams such as Wolves or Ipswich or Brentford. Is one of the reasons I didn't captain Mbeumo, because you just can't fully rely on these assets as much as you can the likes of Palmer and Salah. The only other player to mention probably is Kluivert, who scored a hat-trick of penalties. Let me know in the comments. I don't know if this is the first time to happen in the Premier League. It's probably happened once before, but this is incredibly interesting. So I am in the midst of a PhD in sports psychology. I also lecture in sports psychology. I've done a master's degree in sports psychology. So I've been studying sports psychology now for almost 8 years. So I know a lot of the research into penalty taking. My master's dissertation was on penalty taken under pressure, where we looked at eye tracking and heart rate when you take penalties under pressure. So I'm quite well read in the topic. Most research seems to suggest that if you get more than 1 penalty in a game, you give the second or third penalty to someone else, because it's very difficult against the same goalkeeper in the same game to successfully score multiple penalties. We've seen it in the past, and actually we saw this with Arsenal, but I don't know if this was the reason for it. When there is more than one penalty, often the teams will share that out. But yeah, on this occasion, Kluivert just said, nah, I'm taking all 3 of them. And what I found even more interesting is Evanilson won the first 2 penalties. Evanilson took a penalty earlier in the season, obviously missed it, but we assume that he might still be sharing them with Kluivert. And given that he won both of the first 2, if Evanilson was sharing penalties with Kluivert, he's going to take one of the first couple. And so this tells me 2 things. Firstly, Kluivert is a monster at penalties because his penalty record has been insane. And honestly, all three of them were dispatched incredibly well. And then secondly, he is first choice on penalties, comfortably ahead of anyone else. And by the way, a few people were asking, Semenyo's not on penalties and never has been. So even also not on pens, Semenyo not on pens, Kluivert is. Therefore, the question comes, is Kluivert an option, given that Bournemouth's fixtures are quite good coming up? Unfortunately, not for me. The minutes aren't there particularly. And when I look at his non-penalty expected goals per 90, it's 0.13. So a goal every... because he's not going to get 90 minutes. He's probably going to get 60 minutes a game. You're probably looking at a non-penalty expected goal every 12, 13 games for Kluivert, which really is quite low. So I guess what I'm saying is unless he does continue getting penalties or he can increase his goal threat or his minutes, I just don't think Kluivert's an option. But yeah, I just found it really interesting from a psychological perspective that Kluivert stepped up and took 3 penalties in a given game and honestly dispatched them incredibly well too. So the next game was the 5:30 kickoff, West Ham versus Arsenal. This was just once again the Bukayo Saka show. I've said this 2 weeks in a row now. Saka was absolutely outstanding. And he actually got man of the match against Sporting as well. That is now 3 games in a row since Ødegaard's come back that Saka has been ridiculous, like head and shoulders above anyone else on that pitch. Please watch the highlights. If you're wondering what to get Saka, and again, this is deja vu from last week because I said the same thing. It wasn't the data that made me buy Saka because I bought Saka this week for an 18 pointer, which feels great. It wasn't the data. And this is where XG can be a little bit misleading. I watched the game and then I said, and I watched parts of the Sporting game, I don't want to not own Saka at the moment. Saka looks absolutely monstrous with Ødegaard back in the team. And it's interesting because I said on both FPL Therapy and my FPL Raptor videos throughout the week that Saka doesn't mega haul. And I pointed out that the fact that he doesn't get those 17, 18, 20 pointers because his goal threat is not good enough. I've said that consistently. And then he goes and shuts me up and makes me look like a right idiot because he gets an 18 pointer. What I will say to try and defend myself slightly, because I said for me, Saka's not a captaincy option because he doesn't go nuclear. He doesn't get those mega hauls. And obviously, top scorer midfielder out of all of the premiums this week. It was 3 assists and 1 goal. He, again, in this game, outside of the penalty, didn't have many chances to score goals. So I actually looked, over the last 3 weeks, Saka is averaging 0.12 XG non-penalty per 90. Over the last, 0.12 in Game Week 13. He's averaging 0.16 over the last 3. So Saka's goal threat across the season about 0.25. Across the last 3, 0.16. Saka's not a particularly good or high goal threat in FPL at the moment. But I think a couple of things. Saka does overperform his XG on a consistent basis because I think he's a very good finisher and I think he finds chances cutting on his left that will look like low XG opportunities, but Saka has mastered the ability to score, cutting in off the right and scoring with his left foot. So those are the couple of reasons. And also with his ridiculous assist threat on corners from open play and the fact that he's on penalties, I think when you look at everything together, Saka is still a fantastic option despite the low goal threat. And he is one of very few players that I would say I'm still happy to bring in despite his XG being that low. So I hope you appreciate that because it shows that I am not only fixated on XG and that sometimes there are players that I just ignore the data for because I think they're that fantastic. Again, if you saw the fixtures from Game 14 to 18 on Fantasy Football Hub by fixture difficulty, apparently, according to them, Arsenal have the best fixtures in the league over the next 5. The reason for that, 3 of them are away. 3 of them are at home against United, Everton, and Ipswich in 18. And the 2 away games against Fulham and Palace, you'd still expect Arsenal to score goals. I think Bukayo Saka is getting into a category right now where I'd be willing to take a hit for him in a lot of cases. And there aren't many players that I often feel that way about, but you almost have to drop data, drop the idea of a -4 is a really bad thing to do. Saka's expensive, I'm not going to captain him, and just say, what more do you need him to do in terms of his overall performances across the last few games? I think even going into Manchester United, it's another game where I could see him doing incredibly well. Man United are playing with this sort of back 5, back 3 system, and I've seen a lot of players get a lot of joy where there's this gap between the centre-backs and the wing-backs, and they're not really sure, should they be dropping deep? Should the wing-back be pushing up? Should the centre-backs be drifting wide and then they leave the space in the centre? So I think it's another game where Bukayo Saka could do really well. I would, in a lot of cases, be willing to take a hit to bring Bukayo Saka in this week. Gabriel obviously had a really good performance in the first half, getting his goal, which, by the way, was not a typical Gabriel bullet header. It was a little glancing header, but it was brilliant once again. He's so good in the air. And he gets an assist for the penalty where he basically got punched in the head. So a brilliant first half for him. 9 points overall. He did come off at half-time. Now, Arteta said it was related to the previous injury that he was related to the previous injury that he had in Lisbon with the niggle that he's feeling. We decided to take him off. So according to Arteta, it was just precautionary, a little bit of rest, and it was related to the injury in Lisbon. Some other people were saying maybe he was a bit dazed after getting punched in the head, but obviously they don't want to come out and say it's concussion, because as soon as you say it's concussion, then they might have to follow that concussion protocol, which can be, I think, up to 10 days where the player can't play. So I think they've avoided having to follow the Premier League's concussion protocol. But what I've said previously is I'm also not suggesting that Arsenal are going to play a player that is concussed. So if there is a genuine issue there, then he won't play. If you watch the game, at the end, the celebrations, Gabriel was on the pitch celebrating with a big smile on his face. He posted on Instagram immediately after as well. By all accounts, I think Gabriel will be absolutely fine. I agree with Arteta. It probably was precautionary. They were 5-2 up at halftime. You don't need to risk one of your most important players. So I think Gabriel will be okay. As I said last week when he was a massive doubt, we're not going to get anything from Arteta, but I wouldn't sell him because I think right now, probably, in fact, I do think Gabriel is the best defender to own in FPL. So I wouldn't be selling him, even if he was ruled out for the Man United game. Honestly, even if he was ruled out for the next 2 games, I'd still be keeping Gabriel. I think he's that good. I actually thought, Timber was outstanding once again. I really liked the performance that I saw from him. I think he looks better than Ben White at right back. And I will go as far as saying, if Timber can stay fit, I'm not convinced Ben White gets back into the starting 11 ahead of Timber, even once he's back. And if he does, I would argue Timber's probably first choice left back. Calafiori has good moments, and largely I've been impressed with him, but he does also switch off quite a lot. I mean, for the Wan-Bissaka goal, he completely switched off. I think that Timber is probably first choice right back and left back at the moment. And I've been very impressed with him. He's really good going forward. The data doesn't necessarily suggest that, but again, there needs to be a bit of eye test there. He's getting into some advanced positions. And I think that link up between Ødegaard, Saka, and Timber is continuing to strengthen. So as long as Timber can stay fit, I think he starts 9 of the next 10. My issue is that if there is some level of fatigue, I mean, he's not played a lot of minutes to this point. There is always the chance that he does just get rested in 1 or 2 games coming up, especially when they have midweek deadlines. But I think he continues to start. He's been so good for them. Havertz was back into the starting 11. He had 0.65 XG, 1 big chance, 2 shots in the box, and most importantly, 90 minutes. So if there were any concerns around, Havertz might not play now that obviously he missed 1 game, he's played 90 minutes in 12 of the 13 games this season. He is about as nailed as an asset can be. But of course, he might miss the odd game, as might any player. But if you've got Havertz, I wouldn't be selling him. Now, what would my ideal Arsenal triple up be? It would probably be Saka, Gabriel, and Timber. But if I had like Saka, Gabriel, and Havertz, I would be desperate to sell Havertz to get double Arsenal defence. I suppose in terms of value for money, yeah, Havertz isn't in the top 4 or 5 Arsenal assets because he's quite expensive. If we're talking about genuine value, probably something like a João Pedro and Timber is better than a cheap defender and Havertz. But if you've already got Havertz or you just want to differentiate, let's say you're not fully convinced by the Arsenal defence or you're happy just having one of them, then yeah, I have no issue with Kai Havertz. And he will continue to be extremely lowly owned. But with their fixtures from Game Week 18, I see lots of goals for Arsenal. I'm just bringing their fixtures up now because it starts with Ipswich at home in 18, then Brentford away, Brighton away, Spurs at home, Villa at home, Wolves away. That run of fixtures there are clean sheets, by the way, galore there probably for Arsenal. But I do prefer them from an attacking perspective. The likes of Brentford, Brighton, Spurs, Villa, Wolves, those are teams that can score goals, but they're also teams that ship a lot of goals. So yeah, I guess what I'm saying is this further confirms that Bukayo Saka for me is a really good player to bring in, but also that Havertz could do very well in the long term too. In terms of other players in this game, let's move on to West Ham, because I think Jared Bowen is a player that a lot of people will be looking at this week as an Mbeumo replacement. West Ham's fixtures coming up are Leicester away, Wolves at home, Bournemouth away, Brighton at home, Southampton away. In terms of overall fixtures, it's difficult to get a much better set there. I mean, it's tail-ended with Leicester and Southampton, so you know it's a nice run. There are goals there for West Ham, and actually, they've not been brilliant going forward this season, but it's more defensively that they've struggled as opposed to offensively. My concern with Bowen, and I'm maybe going to contradict what I said there about over-reliance on XG, his non-penalty expected goals per 90 this season is 0.12. There is a level of eye test is important, and Jarrod Bowen has been playing well. He's always on the pitch for West Ham, and he will get goals over this spell. I have absolutely no doubt. So maybe the data will improve, but that's not just low data. That's like, it's abysmal data, really, for an attacker that costs as much as he does. Most defenders in the league have roughly 0.12 non-penalty expected goals per 90. Like, if I actually just look through my back line, I've not done this, so I might be wrong here, but yeah, Gabriel's got 0.15. So Gabriel has more goal threat than Bowen this season. Leif Davis won't, because he's not a particularly attacking player in terms of goal threat. Vandenberg will be a good example here. Vandenberg 0.08, so not far off Jarrod Bowen. Rico Lewis 0.08, not far off Jarrod Bowen. 8 Nuri 0.1. So again, very similar to Jarrod Bowen. I guess what I'm saying here is even defenders that don't have a massive amount of goal threat will have roughly 0.12 non-penalty expected goals per 90. So, two things. You either have to be someone that hates XG and hates data and doesn't believe in it, which is absolutely fine, in which case Jarrod Bowen's great, or you have to believe that there will be an upturn in the amount of chances he gets to score goals with the better fixtures. And I will absolutely back that narrative. So, again, might contradict what I usually do here. I am still tempted to bring in Jarrod Bowen because the fixtures are so good. But would I be surprised if Mbeumo outscores Jarrod Bowen over the next 5? No chance. Because I don't think Jarrod Bowen is first choice penalty taker. That should be Paquetá, who's been getting good minutes. Mbeumo is. Mbeumo's goal threat, whilst it's been pretty poor in the last 4, still across the season it's better. Mbeumo also has more creativity as well. And I would back Brentford as a better attack than West Ham too. So when I put all of that together, yeah, I probably would still prefer Bowen for the fixtures. But there's just something blocking me, and it probably is just I look at that data and it's so poor. So yeah, let me know what you think on Jarrod Bowen, but for me, I need to see a little bit more from him. The next game, moving on to Sunday, is Chelsea 3, Villa 0. So lots to talk about in this game. I watched this game in full. Rodgers, firstly, subbed in the 65th minute. He did look quite fatigued, and I would say for about even 8 to 10 weeks now, he's been looking quite fatigued. We've seen a lot of subs between sort of 55 and 70 minutes for him. However, I quite like that he was subbed early because I think it does make him more likely to start the game against Brentford at home. Would I be surprised if against Brentford or Southampton, Rodgers is on the bench for one of them? Not hugely, because he started, I think, every game this season for them, maybe bar one, but his minutes have been very secure. And at some point, the man will need a rest. That being said, there are other issues as well associated with Rodgers. So it's not just the fact that his minutes haven't been perfect. He's also not really getting involved in those final actions. So across the last 3 games, he's averaging 0.18 non-penalty expected goal involvement. I just slated Jarrod Bowen, who's actually got higher non-penalty expected goal involvement because he carries the assist threat. So actually, those numbers are really, really worrying for Morgan Rodgers. So once again, could they improve against Brentford at home and Southampton at home? Absolutely. And of course, he could return. But what I've seen over the last 3, 4, 5 from Rodgers, it's not been particularly good for him. So I now look at Rodgers as a player that ideally I don't think you want to start most weeks if you can help it. He's still a fine 8th attacker, but also I probably would be willing to sell him if I had someone like a Semenyo instead. If you'd have asked me 3 or 4 weeks ago, I probably would have rather sold Semenyo than Rodgers, especially because of the 4 yellow card situation. But now that Semenyo has served his ban, now that we're seeing a lot of early subs and relatively poor performances from an FPL perspective for Rodgers, I do wonder if Semenyo is the better. In fact, I think Semenyo is the better long-term player to have from Bournemouth. So Rodgers is one of those where he's not a priority transfer out. I think if you've got him, you're okay starting him against Brentford at home, but he's lower in my... So if my list of midfielders that I want to own, Rodgers is definitely lower than he was a few weeks ago. So he's one to monitor. I am starting him at the moment in my own FPL team, but I'm looking at sets of transfers which might allow me to potentially bench him this week and then maybe start him against Southampton if he gets not too many minutes against Brentford and if Aston Villa look a little bit stronger. Watkins is a very interesting one. He had a couple of chances again, probably should have scored at least one of them, and he does look very lively. I just worry that Duran's going to get a start. In fact, if Duran doesn't get a start in the next 3 games, he's got to hand in some sort of transfer request because it's a joke at this stage. What more can he do? And I know he hasn't been as good as he was at the start of the season, but Emery's got to give Duran more minutes. I mean, surely. And it could be, honestly, alongside Watkins instead of Rodgers. So they could play the pair of them, or they could play all 3 of them. There is a world in which they play like a 4-4-2 with Morgan Rodgers off the left and Duran and Watkins up top. But I just think it probably makes more sense to play a very similar structure and just start Duran ahead of Watkins. Watkins isn't in the best run of form. Duran is a brilliant forward in his own right. So yeah, I would have some worries and concerns about whether Watkins might get a bench in one of the next 2, but the same goes for Rodgers as well. And so honestly, when I look at this, I just wonder, I think I would probably avoid all Villa assets. Now, would I sell Rodgers or Watkins ahead of Brentford at home and Southampton at home? The answer to that is probably no. So it's, once again, don't buy, don't sell, and probably start. Although with Rodgers, I think there is justification to maybe bench him this week. So I think that's it on Aston Villa. I would keep their assets for a couple more weeks. But if after Brentford and Southampton we're still not impressed, I think that is then the exit point for them. On Chelsea, they've been remarkably good this season. I think they're 3rd based on alphabetical order, but basically joint 2nd. Honestly, could they win the league? I mean, let me know what you think in the comments. I will just say no, purely due to the fact that they've not been in the running for a while now. And we saw with Arsenal that Arsenal over the last couple of seasons have had points where they've looked like they're in the running. And I feel like you do need that experience. Now, what is in their favour is the silly amount of squad depth. Though honestly, Arsenal don't have. If Arsenal get an injury to Rice or Saliba or to one of their forwards, Havertz even, or Saka or Erdegaard, we've seen that they don't really have the backup. If Chelsea lose Jackson, it's a massive loss, but Nkunku's great. Cole Palmer would be the only one that I think is almost irreplaceable in that team. But even defensively, if they lose a player, I think they have enough squad depth, especially in that midfield position. Caicedo, Lavia, Enzo, they've got really decent options in there. So yeah, Chelsea, I just think, are a really strong team. We need to start considering them as one of the better teams in the league. So on Jackson, I feel like I got this wrong, going for Isak rather than Jackson, but there is a lot of hindsight there. The reason for not going for Jackson is I thought he would either miss the Southampton game due to Nkunku just starting instead, or he might get booked against Villa, almost sometimes maybe deliberately, so that he could play Villa and Spurs and miss Southampton. Not only did he not get the booking, so he's available for Southampton, he was subbed off in the 69th minute. Of course, he also got a goal as well, which he took incredibly well. So I see absolutely no reason why Jackson wouldn't start against Southampton at home. Only 69 minutes, scored another goal, didn't pick up the yellow. Yes, I think once again he might only get 70 to 75 minutes. Sorry, not Southampton, Southampton away. But it's such a good fixture. I really think there is justification to just go from Isak to Jackson this week. It just makes a lot of sense for me. But he is still on 4 yellows, and he could pick up that yellow card very, very soon. But he's managed to hold off for quite a while now. So I think I maybe overestimated how much of a rotation risk he would be. I just didn't think he'd get such an early sub in game against Villa. But maybe that is game state dependent. Maybe I expected Villa to do well. And I do wonder if Villa were doing better in the game. Let's say it was 0-0 or 1-0 to Villa. I don't think Jackson comes off in the 69th minute at that point. So yeah, there's a little bit of game state there. There's a little bit of hindsight. But basically, to put that into more simple terms, Jackson is an elite pick in FPL at the moment. And especially for Game Week 14, I fully expect Jackson to start against Southampton. And therefore, he's a brilliant player to buy right now. I actually think Cole Palmer had a very quiet game. One of his more quiet games in the Premier League this season. But with Palmer, he can just turn it on at the right moment. A couple of moments of magic, a goal and an assist. I mean, what more do we need to say about Cole Palmer? Penalties, some set pieces, great quality, pretty much always on the pitch. Again, with Cole Palmer, there is a concern. He's not started any midweek games this season because he's not been registered for the Europa Conference League squad. That was done deliberately to manage his minutes. So you could look at that 2 ways. Cole Palmer's not started any midweek games, so therefore he doesn't start again. Or he's not started any midweek games, therefore the man should be feeling pretty fresh all in all, and he should be capable of starting this. And it is a Premier League game. It's very different to him not starting Europa Conference League game. He's not starting those, but will he be benched for a Premier League game? I would say I'm 85.76% confident that Cole Palmer will start in Game Week 14. Again, will that be the case? I have absolutely no idea, but I am feeling confident enough as we'll discuss captaincy in a second, to probably captain Cole Palmer. So yeah, as of right now, I've got him as my captain, and I think he's absolutely fine for this week. Chelsea continue to look extremely strong defensively. They are the fourth best defense this season for non-penalty expected goals with 13.2 conceded. So fourth best. However, Nottingham Forest have conceded 13 and Arsenal 13.1. So they're only 0.2 XGC off being the second best defense in the league. After Chelsea is actually Fulham, who are on something like 15. So those top four defenses are in sort of a league of their own at the moment. And I guess what I'm saying here is Chelsea are much better defensively than people give them credit for. We've been saying that the issue with Chelsea is a lot of individual errors. They give away the ball at the back a lot. They make silly decisions on the ball. Sanchez can be a little bit chaotic, but if they can reduce those individual errors, they're not actually giving up many chances from open play. And I actually thought it was another really good defensive performance from Chelsea. Yes, Watkins probably should have scored 1 or 2 goals, but every team gives up at least a couple of chances in a given game. So yeah, I was quite impressed. The only concern is Fofana went off injured, and early information is that this will be a 4 to 5 week injury. And Fofana's injury record isn't great at the best of times. So I do wonder whether it could even be longer than that. Fofana and Colwell have built up a really nice partnership in that defense. And Fofana is comfortably, I would even argue, their best centre-back, if not their second best after Colwell. So with Fofana injured, it's going to be one of probably Tosin or Badiashile or Disasi playing centre-back. It was Badiashile that came on in Game Week 14. I think Tosin's been getting, at the start of the season, had some decent minutes. I reckon it's Tosin or Badiashile, probably Badiashile, and that is a big step down from Fofana for me. So, will that make Chelsea weaker defensively? Yes. But do I still think they're worth investing in as a defense? I think they probably are. Whether you go a little bit risky for Augusto, which I probably wouldn't do, seeing as they've shown that they can play Disasi right back, or Caicedo at right back inverting, or you go for a Colwell, which I think makes a little bit more sense. It's up to you. But yeah, I honestly think Chelsea defense will continue to be pretty good, and I think they'll keep clean sheets. Let's just see how much that Fofana injury does affect them. On Man United Everton, I don't think there's too much to say here from an FPL perspective because they're both going into pretty tricky fixture runs. So if I go back to the fixtures here, Manchester United over the next 3 have Arsenal and City away and Forest in the middle. So for the attackers, I mean, they're not 3 great games there. They are second bottom in terms of fixtures over the next 5, according to Fantasy Football Hub. After that, they then have Bournemouth at home and Wolves away, which isn't awful. But the next 3, it's just not a good entry point, playing Arsenal and City away in the next 3 games. Everton's fixtures aren't quite as bad, but they're not much better. They've got Wolves at home this week, which isn't awful. Then Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, City. So actually, they're probably worse. They've just obviously got that really decent fixture at home this week. So I honestly don't think you're probably bringing in Manchester United or Everton players. But I think it was a pretty dominant performance from Manchester United. The XG apparently was only 0.73 accumulated for United. So the 4-0 is probably quite flattering. But all 4 of those chances, I think, probably should have resulted in goals. So I think maybe a 3-0, if you watched the game, probably felt better. Maybe 3-1, because Everton did have a couple of chances. Really, from an FPL perspective, the player that continues to stand out is Ahmad. He's looked so good at right wing back, defensively and offensively. He obviously got 2 assists in Game Week 13 as well. I see no reason why Ahmad won't be first choice right wing back now, but will he start every game? Absolutely not. We've got so many players that Anthony can play that role, according to Amorim. We can play Mazraoui there. He's said on 3 occasions now, Dalot is better as a right wing back, and that's where we'd like to see him. So, yeah, they could switch Ahmad. And by the way, that might work because Ahmad's left-footed. But I guess what I'm saying is, with the 3 fixtures they've got coming up, with the possible rotation, like, I don't see why right now you'd buy Ahmad. The only reason I can think is if you're making a set of moves to try and get a Saka, Salah, or Palmer into your team, and as part of that, you need a cheap midfielder around 5 million, then yes, Ahmad probably is top of the list for me, but it would only be if you need that transfer right now. Otherwise, just wait 3 weeks and assess. Obviously, Rashford and Xerxes both got 2 goals each. I would ignore both of them. We could play Højlund. We can play Garnacho. We don't have to start the pair of them. Rashford's minutes look pretty secure at the moment. He was playing almost like a hybrid 9-10 with Xerxes because they can both play both positions. I just, again, with the 3 fixtures, I'm not interested. Fernandes is interesting because a lot of people have him already, or they've got Mbeumo and they're wondering. He's got a lot of returns recently. Is Fernandes an option? It was a really good performance for him. He played as part of the front 3. My concern is that in the Europa League, he's played as part of the midfield 2. And the XA in that game where he got 2 assists, it was only like 0.2 expected assists. So, like, for example, Rashford's goal from the corner where Rashford volleyed it from the edge of the box and it took a deflection. Like, it wasn't like he created like numerous massive opportunities in that game. The one for Xerxes obviously was, but I think Fernandes is a fine hold because after the next 3, the fixtures do look a lot better for Manchester United. I wouldn't be going out and buying him this week. I'd probably just hold Mbeumo if that is your only option. So yeah, I'll leave it there with Man United. Basically, let's come back in 3 weeks, closer to Christmas, and if they're still performing well under Amorim, that's when we'll have a bit of a chat because that's when the fixtures improve. But yeah, 4-0, definitely a good first home game for Amorim in the Premier League. The next game was Spurs 1, Fulham 1. Spurs are just so unpredictable. Really wasn't a good performance from them. 0.65 XG accumulated for Spurs, 1.38 for Fulham. Fulham should have won this game. I actually thought after all of the disrespect that I've seen on social media in the last week, Fraser Forster was very good. I think he made a good few saves. A lot of them where people would say he's not very good, like diving down to his right at one point because he's so tall and he's not particularly mobile. But I thought it was a decent performance from him. Johnson obviously starts and scores again. I thought it was another performance where Johnson didn't do a lot from a footballing perspective, but for FPL, he is a real goal threat. I think he's fine to hold for the foreseeable future. I just think when Kulusevski starts and Solanke's back from illness, because that's why he missed out, I'm just not convinced that his minutes will be as good as they were as maybe like 6 weeks ago when we said he was absolutely nailed on. Because we've seen Maddison's playing a lot better. Kulusevski can play out on the right, and then it's Son, Solanke, Kulusevski and Maddison, and then there's no place for Johnson. So yeah, with the fixtures coming up against Bournemouth, Chelsea, Southampton in the next 3, you're probably fine to keep Son, Solanke, Johnson, Porro, all of these Spurs assets. But no, I'm not desperate to bring them in. So once again, it's probably don't buy, maybe don't sell unless you've got luxury transfers to use, and then probably just give them a bit of a start and hope that they do something against Bournemouth away. But yeah, I'm not desperate looking at Spurs' performances to bring in their players because they're just too unpredictable for me and it's just not worth the headache. The only other Spurs player to mention is Heung-min Son. He actually got 90 minutes, which I was really shocked at because he played 76 minutes in Europe. I was like, there's no way Son gets more than sort of 70 minutes in this game. Gets 90, which is potentially obviously game state dependent. It's also the fact that Solanke wasn't there due to illness. I don't expect him to get 90 minutes on a regular basis. I still don't think he's a 90-minute man anymore. And I don't think Son's a bad choice. Like, if you was to tell me you're bringing in Son this week, because he's got Bournemouth at home, Bournemouth away this week, he's got Southampton in a couple, then yeah, it's okay. But if I were to list my premiums in order of who I would want, let's actually do that. My list of premiums in order of who I would want is Salah still, Palmer, Saka. No disrespect to Saka, by the way. I just think with the fixtures, Salah and Palmer are more captainable. And then probably even Haaland, then Son. Son is probably my 5th choice premium at the moment. So no, I would ideally not like to bring in Son. But if you've got him, you could definitely keep him for the next few. Raul Jimenez had another 4 shots in the box. He missed another huge chance as well. That was the save that Fraser Forster made. He continues to start. His minutes are over 70 in most games. But with all of the games coming up and the fixtures that they have coming up, unless you can rotate Jimenez out for the Arsenal and City games. Is it Arsenal and City? Let me double check that. Fulham have... Where are they on this list? Brighton, Arsenal, as Arsenal and Liverpool, then Southampton, then Chelsea. So we've got Arsenal, Liverpool, and Chelsea in the next 5. I would say, unless you've already got João Pedro, maybe you've already got Cunha, and you can rotate Jimenez out for the more difficult fixtures with someone like a Rodgers or Semenyo, then fine, you can keep Jimenez. But unless you're in that very specific situation, I still feel like Jimenez is a fine sell because I think Meniz could get a start, and Jimenez just clearly isn't in a good run of form. He's just not finishing his chances. The positives is that he continues getting so many chances. Like, he's had big chances in his last 3 games. So depends which way you want to look at it. For me, I got too frustrated last week. I saw João Pedro there, and whilst João Pedro didn't outscore him, I just feel a lot more comfortable having João Pedro in my team. So yeah, that's the position I'm in with Raul Jimenez. The final game of the game week then was Liverpool 2, Man City 0. The first half was one of the most embarrassing things, and I don't say that lightly, that I've ever seen. Like, Liverpool were exceptional. It was a combination of Liverpool playing some of the best football they have even this season, and they've been great. But also, City just weren't at it. Like, they couldn't get out of their own box. The amount of times they were playing out the back, Liverpool's press was unbelievably strong. They just had so much energy. It honestly looked like an FA Cup tie. We've got like a Premier League team versus like a League Two team. It just looked embarrassing for Manchester City. Salah was out of this world. So good. It was one of his better performances this season. The assist was one of the best assists that I have seen in recent years. That cross was impeccable. And it's even better because a lot of players play those crosses where they play it in behind the defense, but he picked out Gakpo there. He saw the run and he had a margin of only a few inches to play that ball into that position. It was perfect. The weight of it. And he also missed a massive one-on-one too. So he could have been coming away with 2 goals and an assist. Obviously, there is some level of fortune to getting a penalty, but these things happen. Kluivert gets 3 of them. Chris Wood gets a penalty. Saka gets 1. Erdegaard gets 1. I mean, there was a lot of penalties, by the way, this week. But yes, this is why we own penalty takers, right? Because they get penalties and it happens. But he did very well to convert it. It was actually a very well taken penalty after his miss against Real Madrid. Salah is just the best asset in FPL at the moment. You don't need me to tell you that. The man is averaging over 10 points per game week. He's now had 9 double-digit returns this season, which is the same number as the entirety of last season, and we're not even at the midway point. So the same number of double-digit hauls as the entirety of last season. He's also had now 1 bonus point more than the entirety of last season as well. Salah is just ridiculous. Buy Salah at all costs. Get him into your team because he doesn't show any sign of slowing down. He's still performing well and he's still getting chances and his minutes are great. The defense is very interesting for Liverpool because Trent looked like he could be back on the menu. Really good performance. 8 points for him. He is still playing a deeper role for Slot than he did for Klopp. But in this game, he actually popped up in the edge of the box a few times. He had 3 shots, 2 key passes. I think he was unfortunate not to come away with a goal or an assist in this game, and I liked what I saw from him in the team. The issue is he's coming back from a hamstring injury. Could he re-aggravate that? How good will his minutes be? We know that Connor Bradley is out as well. That obviously makes his minutes a lot better because the other thing is Gomez is having to play centre-back because Konate is out. Gomez would be the only real risk for me starting instead of Trent. We saw that it was actually Quansah that came on for Trent when he came off the pitch. So I think Trent's minutes will be quite good. Robertson's minutes will be quite good as well. I've seen some people suggesting Tsimikas was seen on crutches. But I just think for me, arguably the defender to own is Virgil van Dijk. Now, there is a bit of knee-jerk here because he had so many chances. He had 3 headers in the box. He hit the post. He missed 1 from a couple of inches. He was so good in the air. And all in all, it was one of the better performances that I've seen from Van Dijk in the last 2 seasons. Like, he was just so good. He gave Haaland absolutely nothing. He did give the ball away at 1 point towards the end of the game. But outside of that, Van Dijk was so good. I wonder whether it might be worth the saving just going for Van Dijk. I suppose if you have all of the money in the world, you go for Trent. You do, of course, because it's Trent. But Van Dijk's minutes are so secure. He is good from set pieces. And with how good Liverpool have been defensively, and with Joe Gomez, by the way, they still looked very good. I still think the Liverpool defense is where I'm lacking in my team right now. I'm wondering, is there a way for me to get Big Verge into the team? Because I just don't think I'm going to be able to sadly stretch to Trent unless I make a couple more transfers. But yeah, I am very interested in the Liverpool defense. A couple of people asking me about Joe Gomez. You could go there. You absolutely could because he's clearly first choice centre-back ahead of Quansah. Even when Quansah came on for Trent, we all thought that Gomez would go to right-back and Quansah would go to centre-back. That didn't happen. Joe Gomez stayed as the centre-back, and it was a good performance from him. He was very good on the ball. He was pretty good in the air as well. I think Joe Gomez probably is nailed on as the first choice centre-back in the absence of Konate. It's just how long Konate's out for. And if Konate's back slightly sooner than we thought, it might be that you only get a few more games from Joe Gomez. So I probably wouldn't go there, but there would be some temptation if I had like 3 or 4 free transfers and I was in a luxury position. I think Gakpo was arguably man of the match. If Gakpo's minutes continue to look really good, I will be tempted to go there very soon. But he's only started 5 of the last 7 games with 2 benchings. That's not quite enough for me. I want him to start 9 in 10. Probably is where I'm looking, or 8 in 10. But 5 in 7, you're probably looking at then maybe 7 starts, maybe 8 starts in 10, but probably 7 starts is what he's averaging in 10 games. That's not quite enough for me to justify his price tag, but I've been very impressed. Like I said, was probably my man of the match in that game. And if he continues to look that good, dependent upon when Jota's back, Darwin's clearly not first choice. So it's Diaz and Gakpo at the moment that seem to be the favoured players in that starting 11 alongside Mohamed Salah. Moving on to Man City, Rico Lewis played as actually a right winger in that game, more like a right midfielder, but he almost played as part of the front 3. I don't think he was particularly great. He did have a chance to score. He almost set up Haaland at one point. The good thing with Rico Lewis is because he can play so many positions, if he's not playing right back, he can still play right wing. If he's not playing right wing, he can play central midfield. If he's not playing central midfield, he can play left back. That is a good thing because he's so versatile that he plays in a lot of positions when other players are getting minutes. He started 11 of the 13 games in the Premier League this season. There's a lot to like about Rico Lewis, but City are terrible defensively. I've not seen much attacking threat from him. And in all honesty, I don't know that he will start in a given week because I expect Guardiola to come straight back in. Pep Guardiola, for some very, very strange reason, loves Kyle Walker. And then I don't think this experiment of playing Rico Lewis in midfield or on the right wing is working. I just don't think it looks good for them. So I think Doku and Savinho probably come back in as the wingers. So if all of those things happen, well, then he is probably looking at, do you expect Rico Lewis to play central midfield? And do you expect a clean sheet for them? So I just think Rico Lewis isn't great. But if you need to rely on him this week, he's probably got like a 60 to 70% chance of starting, I would guess, based on what we've seen this season. If you do own Guardiola, by the way, I'd still probably keep him. I'd still start him. I do think he was benched due to some poor defensive performances. I just wouldn't rush to sell him this week. Like, I would prefer an Arsenal defender. I'd prefer a Liverpool defender. But do they have good fixtures this week? No. Arsenal play against United. Liverpool play against Newcastle. I'd probably keep Guardiola for at least one more week and then reassess. Obviously, Haaland did absolutely nothing in this game. 2 shots in the box, 0 big chance involvement. I do think that you can glean very little from this. Liverpool were dominant, and even in the times when they weren't dominant, Gomez and Van Dijk were exceptionally strong. So when I look at it all together, I just personally think that Liverpool is so good defensively that you can't take much from this. However, Haaland's not been good for a while now. I know there'll be a lot of people wondering, just sell Haaland this week. My reasoning for selling Haaland last week is I knew if I waited until game week 14, I'd be tempted to keep him. And therefore, if you own him, I would be tempted to keep him because I would argue he's one of the better captaincy options this week against Nottingham Forest at home. And I mean, the thing is, you've got to remember with Haaland, and I need to keep reminding myself this, it's not just, do you want to have Haaland, yes or no? It's if you sell Haaland, you're getting Saka, Palmer, Salah probably, as well as a mid-price forward, someone like Jackson, and probably having some funds to upgrade the bench or the defense. So do you know what? I'm not going to sit on the fence. I'd probably still sell Erling Haaland. But if you are sat there and you've got somehow Saka, Salah, Palmer, then you keep him. If you've got Salah and one of Saka or Palmer and you don't desperately want the other one, then yeah, you could keep him as well. But just at the moment, based on output, even sometimes underlying data, their price, the fixtures, I'm pretty happy having Salah, Palmer, Saka for at least the next 4 or 5 game weeks, and then I will reassess. But do note that from game week 18 onwards, Haaland has a ridiculously good set of fixtures, right? So from 18 onwards, he's got Everton at home, Leicester away, West Ham at home, Brentford away, Ipswich away. In the space of 5 weeks, we're looking at Leicester, Brentford, Ipswich, Everton, and West Ham. That is a run of games you are not going to really want to go without Haaland for, but you can't afford everyone. So I would probably still lean towards selling him. But if you are thinking, do you know what, I've held him for this long now, I expect City to improve, I also can understand the justification for potentially keeping Erling Haaland. I don't think it's as bad as it was like last week. I think going into the Liverpool game, that was the best exit point for Erling Haaland. Now it feels a little bit better holding on to him. It's a difficult position to be in. I don't envy you because only as early as last week, I was in exactly the same position. I just decided that I wanted Bukayo Saka and I wanted to restructure my team. And obviously right now I'm sat here very happy that I've done so. Cool. So those are the games. Very briefly, just some other questions that were asked before my differentials and then talking through my team. So firstly, captaincy. So lots of people asking about captaincy for game week 14. I've noted down who I think are the best 7 options. So you've got Salah against Newcastle away, Haaland against Forest at home, Palmer against Southampton away. I've put Jackson in there against Southampton away because he deserves at least a bit of discussion on him. Saka against United at home, Son against Bournemouth away, and Watkins against Brentford at home. They are my top 7 captaincy options this week. In terms of who I would rule out, I would rule out Watkins because I don't know that he definitely starts and Villa are not in a great run of form. I would rule out Son because I think Bournemouth are a better defence than people give them credit for. I don't think Son is a 90-minute man anymore and Spurs are too unpredictable. I would honestly rule out Bukayo Saka just simply because I think there are better fixtures to target. And despite him coming off the back of an 18-pointer, his goal threat is a little bit lower than Salah, Haaland, Palmer, and Jackson. So for that reason, I would probably rule out Saka, but I definitely think he's a great option to own. And I would rule out Jackson personally because his minutes aren't as good as Palmer's. He's not on penalties. And I just think Palmer has more routes to points. So in a given week, if I think I want to captain a Chelsea player, I would always prefer to captain Palmer. Also, extra point for a clean sheet and an extra point for a goal. So for those reasons, I have Palmer ahead of Jackson. So as boring as it is to say, I do think the three best captaincy options this week is Salah, Haaland, Palmer. For me, I don't think I'm going to overthink this one. If I think Palmer starts, which I do, Palmer has the best fixture, I will captain Palmer. That's how I'm feeling at the moment. They've all got routes to points, right? They're all on penalties. Palmer's also on some set pieces. They all score goals. They've all got good underlying data. You never know which way it will go. But for me, I would have Palmer as the top option just based on that fixture. So that's the way I'm leaning at the moment. I would actually say I probably marginally prefer Haaland ahead of Salah this week, just simply for the home fixture. And also, there's a little bit of sort of gambler's fallacy. Surely Haaland is going to at some point score some goals. So if I was on a free hit this week, it's probably like Palmer, Haaland, Salah, Jackson, Saka, Son, Watkins in that order. But for me, and I think if you own Palmer, as long as you think he will start, I think he's the best captaincy option. Another question is, what would your ideal defense look like on a wildcard? I'm trying to work out where to go with my defense moving forward. So yeah, I built a wildcard draft and I could afford a team with a defense where I had Van Dijk, Gabriel, Timber, Van Hecke, and Colwill. So 3 premiums in Van Dijk, Gabriel, Timber, and then 2 cheapies in Van Hecke and Colwill. It's quite a lot of money invested in the defense, and I had to sacrifice a little bit in the attack. But basically, because Mbeumo hasn't been great, and because Fernandez's fixtures aren't there, I just basically had to put Mitoma in as my sort of 4th most expensive midfielder, along with Semenyo. So it was a midfield of Saka, Palmer, Salah, Mitoma, and Semenyo, and it allowed me to afford this defense. So what I would be looking at defensively moving forward is I'd want 2 Arsenal defenders, at the very least one. So Gabriel and Timber are in there for that reason. I would ideally like a Liverpool defender. And whilst Gomez is tempting at his price, Van Dijk is the cheapest asset that you can get, I think, for the Liverpool defense that he's fully nailed on outside of Alisson, who's not yet available. So yeah, I think Van Dijk, Gabriel, Timber makes a lot of sense as your starting back 3 most weeks. And then I've just gone for Van Hecke and Colwill because they both start basically every game for their team. They've both got good fixtures. They're both playing for decent defenses, especially Colwill. They just feel like very safe options. Now, I did toy with the idea of going for like 8 Nuri or Lewis Hall or Luca Dean or like trying to be a bit spicy with it. I just think I'm fed up of making defender transfers. And I look at my own defense. I've got like Leif Davis, 8 Nuri, Rico Lewis, Vandenberg. And I'm just thinking, I just want players that are nailed on. Timber's the only defender here that isn't nailed on, but he's got such upside playing as a right back in an attacking Arsenal team that it's worth it. If you can't afford those and you want other cheap options in addition to Van Hecke and Colwill, my other 3 players I would consider is probably Hall, Konsa, and Kerkez. I'm a little bit hesitant to recommend an Aston Villa defender based on the fact that they're not in a good run of form. I think it's like 7 or 8 games in a row now without a win. So it'd probably be Hall or Kerkez. Both of them fairly cheap. Both of them carry some attacking threat, right? Kerkez scored again, or his 3rd attacking return of the season, I think it was, in game week 13. So yeah, I really like the pair of them, but I think I would go Van Hecke and Colwill due to security of minutes, playing for slightly better defenses, and just with the fixtures coming up. So hopefully that helps you with your defensive situation. I really think the priority should be Arsenal and Liverpool if you can afford them. Someone asked, would you take a hit to do Mbeumo to Saka this week? I would. I think Mbeumo isn't as bad as people are suggesting in terms of you can absolutely hold him. I think we sometimes overemphasize the importance of a singular hit. Yes, you are losing 4 points. So that is objectively 4 points lost there. But if it's to bring in a player that you think is much better than the one that you own, if it's also to buy a player before you think the player that you're selling is going to go down in price and the player that you're buying is going to go up in price, it's much more than just sitting here and saying, oh yeah, but I'm losing 4 points, but you're getting Saka instead of Mbeumo. So honestly, I would be very, very tempted to take a hit to buy Saka or Palmer this week. And I think in general, as long as it is a one-off and you're not saying this every week, so if you're saying it every week, then it's not a one-off, but one-off hits aren't the end of the world. And especially when you're upgrading your team and saving some value, I think it's probably worth it. Someone also said, I'm going to sell Mbeumo this week. Who are your favorite options to replace him with? Assuming you are already have or you can't afford Saka, Palmer, Salah, because obviously they would be the top 3. I think for me, it's Jared Bowen, Mitoma, or Semenyo. I think they're the 3 that I'm considering at the moment if I were to replace Mbeumo. I think Jared Bowen stands out in terms of fixtures, but the data's not there. Mitoma's got the fixtures and the data and the minutes so far. So I'd probably lean him at the moment. And then Semenyo's just a nice price save. And if you want to use the funds elsewhere, especially if you do want to upgrade your defense, like that would give you the money to get to Trent or to Van Dijk or to Gabriel or to Timber. So yeah, I would probably say Mitoma, Semenyo, and then Bowen in that order for me at the moment. And I know people won't like that I've put Bowen third, but it's just the data's not quite there. The only other final question was a bit more of a macro point here, but what is your decision-making process when it comes to transfers that are not straightforward at all? E.g., selling Isak for Jackson or not. There were good reasons to choose Isak over Jackson last week, and as long as the former is fit, it seems like a 50-50 decision that can result in very big swings. This is a great question, and I can't obviously go through every single decision, but in this specific situation, I would ask you what has changed. And this is often what I think about if it comes to like reversing a decision. So I bought Isak in Game Week 13, and I might now sell Isak for Jackson. So it's almost reversing a decision. The question is what has changed? Because sometimes all that's changed is that a player is hauled and the other one blanked. That's not enough. If you thought going into 13 that Isak was better than Jackson, and all that had happened, let's say, is Jackson scores a brace and Isak blanks, nothing has changed there. You knew Jackson had the ability to score goals, and in any week a player can blank. In this specific situation, I think quite a bit has changed. Isak is now an injury doubt, right? Which is the first thing. And also, Jackson not only didn't pick up his fourth yellow, but also only got 69 minutes. So now Jackson looks very likely to probably start against Southampton. So I think quite a lot has changed now that would make selling Isak for Jackson more justifiable. So that's all I always think in my head when it comes to making a rash knee-jerk decision or reversing a decision the very week after I've made the opposite one, is has enough changed that makes the switch now justifiable? And I think in this case, it probably does. So that's sort of my mantra for making decisions, and hopefully that is helpful. So guys, as we discuss pretty much every week now, this podcast is sponsored by Club, which is a free-to-play mobile fantasy football game. If you want to check it out, there is a link down below in the description. As I said at the start of the video, it's out in some countries on some devices, so check if it is in yours. But if not, you just have to join the waitlist. So just type in your email address and they'll notify you when the mobile game goes live. But as you can see, I'm on it now live on the screen. Every week, we meet with the agent to see if we can pull a player that will improve my club and my fantasy football team. So I'll just show you, this is the team at the moment. It's actually looking in a pretty good position. I've got Mateta against Ipswich this week. I'm very happy to have the likes of Jackson and Welbeck long term. The midfielders started to improve a little bit, defensively looking really strong. I will just say that it is still the midfield where I'd like to upgrade. So if there is a position where Manny can hopefully, our agent, pull me a slightly better player, it is probably the midfield. So we're going to meet with the agent now. Hopefully we pull a midfielder, but regardless, hopefully we just pull a player that improves my 11. I will just say Manny is pretty unpredictable and often doesn't pull the best players. So we'll do this live and hope that he can pull us a really highly rated player. Let's do this, Manny. Come on. Okay, so do you know, wait, hold on. Terrible player to pull, really. So I've got 77 rated Fabianski. However, this is actually, and this isn't copium, this is actually a better player than I thought at first. I've only got one goalkeeper, which is Onana, who this week has Arsenal, also got City in a few weeks as well. I think, so Fabianski's got Leicester this week, right? Yeah, he's got Leicester. And then when Man United play against City, he's got Bournemouth. That's actually worked quite well as a rotation. So in terms of a highly rated asset, no, Fabianski's not the one. But in terms of a rotation and actually improving my team, believe it or not, Manny has delivered. So do you know what? I'll take that. And if you do want to get involved with Club, I know a lot of people are really hoping that it's out in the UK. Trust me, it will be out soon. Like I said, click the link in the description. Check it out. We'll be talking about Club in the future as well on this podcast. Yeah, I appreciate them sponsoring. And well done, Manny, for actually getting us a player that can improve our team. Right. Moving on to the prediction game for FPL Therapy. There is a little bit of an issue here that all of the solo pods that I do, I'm getting loads of attempts to predict. I don't care. This is my podcast. I do what I want. And off the back of that, I am now top of my own leaderboard. So you've known now for a while that my guests have been stinking it up in terms of predicting 3 differentials that will do well every week, under 10%. And that is the game that we play on FPL Therapy. Top of our leaderboard has been Praz for a while now with 20 points. And he was in game week 2. In second place, we had Pricey from game week 3. I managed to get 26 points in game week 13. So I am now top of the leaderboard with 26 points. My 3 guesses were Matoma, Erdegaard, and Wissa. So they were the 3 differentials that I thought would perform well. All 3 of them scored goals. So yeah, Matoma with 10, Erdegaard with 8, Wissa with 8. That is 26 points if my maths are correct. And I am top of the leaderboard. And what I am trying to do now, I'm going to try and lock up that top 2. So here are my 3 predictions for Game Week 14. Please let me know in the comments, as always, who your 3 predictions are, and maybe track it. See if you can finish top of the leaderboard at the end of the season as well. So, my first player, didn't actually discuss him in the Chelsea game, is Madueke. This is a bit of a risk because I think there is a chance that he doesn't start again, but he started so many games this season. He obviously was benched in this one. I think it was a bit of a rest. I wouldn't be surprised to see him come back into the 11, and it's just such an attackable fixture. We saw how well he did in the Wolves game when Chelsea scored 6 goals earlier in the season. We know that he has that ability to score goals and get chances. I just think that it's the sort of player that I wouldn't bring in a million years because he's too much of a rotation risk moving forward. But if I had him, or I was playing a free hit or something like that, Madueke could be a decent shout. So yeah, he's the first option. I think it's a matchup which could suit him. Now, for the second option, Jared Bowen's actually below 10%. So I could have gone Jared Bowen, but I've gone even more rogue here with Paquetá because I just feel like Bowen's not a differential this week when so many players are going to look to bring him in for Mbeumo. So yeah, Paquetá's minutes have been very good. His attacking threat has been very similar to Bowen. Not particularly great, but when we know Bowen's hasn't been. And we think he is first choice penalty taker when he's on the pitch. Takes some set pieces too. I just think he's a decent shout at 1.3%, and I wanted to go a little bit rogue. So yeah, Paquetá is in there against Leicester away. And then I also have a player against the other newly promoted side, which is Eze against Ipswich away. I was going to stick Mateta in here, but I just love Eze as an option. Extra point for a goal, extra point for a clean sheet. We think it's still probably Mateta on penalty, so he doesn't have that. But back in the starting 11, had a decent performance in Game Week 13. I've just taken a really random punt here that Eze might be able to deliver against Ipswich. So yeah, my 3 players, Madueke, Paquetá, and Eze. So the only other final thing to discuss then is my team for Game Week 14. So I have 1 free transfer and 1.1 million in the bank. I'll read it out for those of you that are listening. So in goal, I have Sanchez against Southampton away. My back line is currently Ait-Nouri against Everton away, Leif Davis against Crystal Palace at home, and Gabriel against Manchester United at home. And then on the bench, I've got Rico Lewis against Nottingham Forest at home, who, if he starts, isn't a bad option, and Vandenberg against Villa away. My midfield is Saka, Palmer, Salah. So I've got that trio in there. And then Mbeumo and Rodgers obviously playing in the same game against each other. And then my front 2 is currently Cunha and João Pedro, obviously both with away fixtures this week, with Isak on the bench as my first sub. So a few decisions to make this week. Do I feel like this is a good time to maybe sell one of my defenders and upgrade that? Because Ait-Nouri, Davis, Lewis, and Vandenberg, it's not a great setup. But this week, I think I'm happy playing Leif Davis against Crystal Palace at home. And if I decide I don't want to do that, I can play Rico Lewis against Nottingham Forest at home. I don't feel like this is the best point right now for me to make a defender transfer. So I'm actually okay with that setup. I also have to decide if I want to play Sanchez against Southampton away or Fabianski against Leicester away. I'm just leaning Sanchez because Chelsea are a better defense. And I think Southampton are a weaker attack as well. The other decision is, do I make a transfer, right? So if I look at my attack, the issues for me are in Mbeumo and Isak, right? I don't mind Rodgers in the 11, but I wouldn't mind selling maybe someone like an Isak to bench Rodgers. I don't think Rodgers is an issue in terms of a player in my squad, but I don't love starting him at the moment based on what I'm seeing from Aston Villa. So my 2 options, I think, is selling Mbeumo to one of Bowen, Mitoma, or Semenyo. Semenyo's not got the best fixture this week, and also I don't really desperately need the funds right now, and I've got Rodgers already as a cheap midfielder, so I'm probably leaning Mitoma or Bowen at the moment. I just don't think it's the best entry point for Mitoma, and with Bowen, I still have doubts around him. So I think if I were to sell him Bowen this week, it would be for Bowen because it's the best entry point, but yeah, I just have doubts there. Isak is probably the more likely one to be sold for me, and it would be Nicholas Jackson that I'd go for. People might just suggest that. They say, right, you got it wrong, Ross. You've got an option this week to go from Isak to Jackson against Southampton away. We know that Isak is a bit of a doubt anyway. It does make a lot of sense, and honestly, I'm extremely tempted, and I might make that move before the deadline. The only concern for me is after Liverpool, Isak's got Brentford, Ipswich, Leicester, which are 3 fantastic fixtures. I actually prefer them for Isak. If Jackson does get booked, not only does Isak have better fixtures and he's on penalties, but he also will have an extra game. So if Isak isn't out long term, I think after the Southampton game, I'd actually rather have Isak back. So it feels very short term. And it would also mean benching one of Rodgers or Mbeumo. As of right now, I would probably start Mbeumo for the penalties and the minutes, and I'd probably bench Rodgers. So yeah, let me know down below in the comments if you would do that. Is basically, do I sell Isak for Jackson to bench Rodgers? And then I would obviously have Jackson moving forward. The team would look very good, to be honest. I like the double Chelsea attack. I just think I would regret not having Isak for the 3 games after Liverpool. If Isak's out long term, then I'll probably just make the switch this week. So I think it really comes down to if we get an update around Alexander Isak's fitness. So yeah, that's my team. Let me know what you think and let me know what your transfer plans are down below as well. But that is the end of the podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in to yet another solo pod. For the next few weeks, there will be guests back in the studio as well. So if you don't really enjoy these solo pods, but you've watched to this point anyway, I do apologize. And there'll be guests back in the very, very near future. And also, like I said, please do not miss the Tuesday evening deadline. If you're watching this on YouTube and you've got to this point and you've not dropped a little like on the video, please do that. And if you're not yet subscribed, I do really appreciate if you look to subscribe as well. And if you're listening on audio, make sure to rate 5-star as well. I will catch you next week, next Monday. So I'll be out on Tuesday for the next episode. Until then, thank you very much. Bye-bye.